YouTube says that I am live. It is now, according to my computer, 10:29. It is now, according to my computer, 10:29. It is now, according to my. Pardon me for that. I had it. Anyway, 10:20, now 10:30 on Tuesday, the 18th of October. Gordon Causey, sometimes known as Gordy Canuck. And I'm changing up gears a little bit. Most of my videos have been about COVID, the vaccines, emergency measures, masking, things of that nature. I'm going to talk about something different off the bat. I will probably touch on those things, but I wanted to talk about the baby boomer generation. And in the description, I've referred to it as something of a time bomb. It's not the best adjective. It's not the best word to describe what I'm going to talk about, simply because when you think of a bomb, you think of one big explosion that happens at a specific moment in time. And when we look at the baby boomer population, what we've seen is a series of explosions. And I wanted to talk about that. Definitions are important. When you're talking about the baby boomer population, who are we talking about? There are differing definitions. Pretty much all sources agree that the baby boom generation, that the earliest members were born in 1946. There's some debate as to when it ended. Some put it 62, some 64. The latest I've seen it punted. The latest date I've seen is 1966, which happens to be the year of my birth. So if you take it to the most furthest end, furthest extreme on the outside end, then I marginally make it into the boomer generation. So I'm the latest. If I'm a boomer, I'm the latest of the boomers. I prefer to think of the baby boom generation ending sometime around 1962. What I tend to refer to the boomer generation now, I tend to say that they're aged roughly age 60 to about age 75, 76. That's my definition of the baby boom generation, and it puts me, outside of that group. I'm what's called, I believe, I've got to check. I'm referred to as Gen X. But the boomer generation, right now in Canada, roughly 1 in 4 Canadians is defined as being a boomer. It's around over 9 million Canadians are considered boomers. And if we look back historically, they've had a massive impact on society their entire lives, starting when they were kids. When they were kids entering the school system, all of a sudden there had to be all kinds of schools being built. Starting in the 1950s, the school construction exploded because the existing school system couldn't accommodate this huge wave of kids coming in. Same thing happened in the university system. I actually went and checked just to see. I mean, just in the 60s alone, the province of Ontario, which is where I live, Brock University was created, and Lakehead and Trent and Guelph. And though Brock is a medium-sized university, I don't know what their undergraduate population is. Lakehead is small, Trent is small, Guelph is a medium-sized institution. York University, where I attended, it started in 1959, in the late 50s, but it was a division. It was attached to the University of Toronto. It actually didn't become a fully independent university in of itself until 1965. And now it's the second largest university in Ontario, with somewhere in the neighborhood of 50,000 undergraduate students. So there's there's an impact on our educational system. How did it affect how did the boomer generation affect the world? Well, the energy crisis that happened in the early 1970s when OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Producing Countries, shut off the tap demand for oil and gas had gone through the roof because why? Boomers were starting to drive. Starting in the 60s, boomers started to drive. By the 70s, you've got all these drivers demanding gas. And so we had an energy crisis. I remember it well because while I don't think it was that big a deal in Canada, I myself was living in the 60s. When I was very small, and then later when I started going to kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, we lived in New Jersey, and we lived through what was called the energy crisis, and there was gas rationing in the state I was living in, New Jersey. Gas stations would have a yellow, red, or green flag, which designated how much gas you could buy. People were lining up. There were lineups to get gas. Huge impact. Then, as we rolled into the later 70s, boomers started moving out of the house and started to access rental accommodation. They started to need apartments. And by that point, we were back living in Canada. We moved back permanently when I was 12. And Toronto, there were reports in the papers at that time about basically the vacancy rate for finding it. If you were looking for an apartment, the vacancy rate was 0. There were no apartments to be found. The demand was simply too high. The boomers had all stormed into the housing market, the rental housing market, and nothing was available. As a matter of fact, there was something that was referred to as key fees. An industry came out of this, and there were people who were called apartment brokers. And it's a bit convoluted. Ontario used to have rent control, and someone vacating an apartment would be engaged by a broker who would get them to sign off their lease and sublet it to someone else, who would then pay a fee of $500, $800, $1,000, with some of that going to the vacating tenant. And then the next broad-based impact, boomers then started buying houses, and we had a housing boom in Canada. Houses were being thrown up left, right, and center. And boomers were going into the capital markets needing mortgage financing to purchase their homes. So you had a huge pig in the python. That's what the boomers have been called. They swarmed into the capital markets, all looking to get money, supply and demand. The demand for mortgage financing was huge, and the supply, well, the price went up. The cost of borrowing money went through the roof, and mortgage rates got up as high as around 20%. It was so bad that people at that time, they were not buying homes, they were buying mortgages, because mortgages can be portable. You can sell your house and sell the mortgage with it, transfer the mortgage to the purchaser. And someone would have a mortgage of 8, 9, 10%, and they put their house up for sale, saying that they were willing to transfer the mortgage. And if the mortgage rate was 8, 9, 10%, that was a hot property, because people could afford 8, 9, 10%. They couldn't afford 16, 18, 20% that if they were going to get financing on their own. Then boomers started to pay off their houses, and they were in their highest income earning years as we got to the end of the 90s and the start of the 2000s. And so boomers started flooding into the capital markets and were investing in stocks. And what did we have? We had the bubble. We sometimes refer to as the tech bubble. Boomers found out that their savings accounts, which in the 70s and early 80s were generating 7, 8, 9, 10% in interest income, now they were getting nothing in interest income from them. So they started to invest in the stock market. Stocks went super high, crazy, insane. Think of Nortel. I think it got up to $140 or so a share for a company that never earned a single dime in profit. And the The tech boom was followed by the bust. The capital markets exploded. There was a crash of the tech market, and companies like Nortel disappeared because they never made a dime in profit. They, it was paper shuffling. Whenever they needed money, they just printed more shares, and boomers were buying them up. And so everywhere the boomers have gone, there's been this boom and then a bust. Boom, bust. There's a book that came out in either the late 80s or the early 90s. I believe it was written by Canadian authors, academics, and it was called Boom, Bust, Echo. And now here we are. We have boomers again, aged, I'm putting the age roughly between the ages of 60 and 75 on the high end. And people who study demographics have warned for 20, 30 years that when the boomer population reached their 60s, 70s, that our healthcare sector would be crushed, that there needed to be significant investments made into the healthcare system, that hospital networks and beds had to be expanded, because as people age, they access the healthcare system, they access hospitals at significantly increased rates, but nothing was done. Instead, you'd read these dire reports about what was needed, and governments would respond. And it didn't matter whether it was a liberal government, an NDP government, a conservative government, they all had the same talking points. We're driving efficiencies in the healthcare sector. And basically, driving efficiencies means doing more with less. And now here we are. And we, even before COVID came along, we saw what was happening in our healthcare sector. Go back and read the articles from 2017, 18, 19, before COVID. And in my province of Ontario, I think it was the 2018 election, when Doug Ford was first elected Premier of Ontario, and as leader of Ontario's Progressive Conservative Party. A key campaign issue that he talked about on the hustings was ending hallway medicine. We coined a term for it because our hospital systems were overwhelmed. They would pile patients up in the hallways, in conference rooms. During flu seasons, patients would have to be treated sitting in a chair in the waiting room because there was nowhere else to put them. And that's where we were. And this is now with the boomers age 60 to, like I say, 75. And with each passing year, their health issues become even more exacerbated. And they become, as we get older, we don't get healthier, we get sicker. I have invited readers or listeners to go to the Ontario Long-Term Care Association website, where they give a snapshot of the patient population back in 2019, so 3 years ago. And they paint a very dim picture of the patient population. We're talking about, and I'm just going off memory, but they talk about the fact that I think it's 90 or more percent, or somewhere around 90% of the people living in long-term care are unable to perform what are referred to as the activities of daily living, ADLs. And those are bathing, toileting, feeding, dressing. That's what it says on their page, is that they need extensive help with the activities of daily living. Roughly 75% suffer from cardiovascular and circulatory diseases. 50, 60% are taking 10 or more prescription medications. We're dealing with a very, very sick population. And I took some grief at the beginning of COVID when we were turning the world upside down, even though it was evident with the reporting coming out of Italy that COVID was only serious and potentially fatal for a very narrow and specific demographic, and that was the elderly, sick, and dying. Overwhelmingly, that's who had to be worried about COVID. And yet we turned the entire world upside down. And I said, we're turning the world upside down so that dear Uncle Joe can have another 2 or 3 months of diaper changes? Really? And I took a lot of grief for that. And it wasn't the kindest way to put it, but I was just floored in March of 2020 when the world got flipped upside down. And I have to wonder, in getting back to the title of this video, is, are we witnessing kind of a broad societal response to the issue of what we're going to do about this aging boomer population? I'll remind you that there's an advisor. This got quite a bit of news when Joe Biden was elected, or however you want to look at it. When Joe Biden became president, however that happened, he appointed to the National Institutes of Health and Anthony Fauci's organization. He appointed as the head bioethicist a gentleman by the name of Ezekiel Emanuel, who also became one of his key advisors on COVID. He has an advisory panel on COVID, and this Ezekiel Emanuel created quite a stir because he had put forward a paper. In it, he said that after age 75, that life is not worth living. And you can check into that. It created quite a stir. The guy's name is Ezekiel, like Ezekiel of the Bible, Ezekiel Emanuel. And, saying life isn't worth living past 75. That's your best before date. And we all know what people do once, a loaf of bread or something goes beyond its or gets to its best before date, gets thrown in the garbage. And although in today's era, hopefully it's stored in, or thrown into the green not recycling, what's the biodegradable whatever. So I think the question is certainly legitimate, because when you look at the boomer population right now, a healthy population, there's something referred to as a population pyramid. If you're unfamiliar with the term, we all know what a pyramid looks like, or triangle is a better way, but they call it the population pyramid. And, they're bars. It's like a bar graph, but ideally it should be shaped like a triangle, and broad at the base and getting narrower, and the smallest bar, the longest bar at the end is supposed to be 0 to 10 years of age, and then 11 to 20, and then 21 to 30, and then 31 to 40. And as you move up the age categories, it should get smaller. The reason that our population pyramid in Canada and in much of the Western world, it's not just Canada, is referred to as the pig and the python is because there's this big glob aged roughly now 60 to 75. And that's impactful across society, because as people move into their retirement years, they're no longer contributors to the economic activity of a society. They're no longer earning high incomes and paying taxes, which are used for all manner of things. Instead, now they're drawing down on their savings, they're collecting their pensions. I'm not suggesting that boomers aren't worthwhile or that elderly people aren't worthwhile. I'm getting close to that juncture of my life as well. It's just the natural order of things. And there's something of a hamster wheel, or a water wheel, if you like. As one group falls off, you need a big base. You need a large working population at the base to support those at the top who are no longer working. And our population pyramid is somewhat broken. It has been, the effect has been mitigated in countries like Canada by high levels of immigration. Canada has massive levels of immigration, and there's an argument to be made that it is absolutely 100% needed because we simply aren't having kids. Kids are not being born in this country. In order to maintain population at a steady level, so Canada's at 38 million people, give or take, right now. And if we want to maintain 38 million, not go up, not go down, just stay right around that level, then every woman has to have the birth rate has to be 2.1. That's the number. That means for every woman in Canada during their childbearing years, they need to have 2.1 children on average. I haven't checked to see what our level is, but I believe it's somewhere around 1.3 or 1.4, which means that there aren't enough children being born to replace people. And so you have an aging population, and that puts all kinds of stress on things. More than a year ago, I was just curious to see if you looked at the Canada Pension Plan, the Quebec Pension Plan, the teacher pension plans, and as well as other government-funded pensions, what kind of dollar figure are we looking at? And by my reckoning, there's around $1 trillion in money invested that is meant, that is to generate income to pay the pensions of government workers, teachers, Canada Pension Plan, which means everybody. And look at where we are. $1 trillion isn't what it used to be. $1 million isn't what it used to be. Who used to think, oh, if I got $1 million, I'd retire. Now, a lot of people don't view, especially if you live in a major metropolitan center like Toronto, Vancouver, that $1 million isn't enough. Not when a house costs over $1 million. So the question I have to ask with respect to this so-called Great Reset is, is this part of the agenda? And I do think it is. I do believe that there is a depopulation component to what we have been experiencing over the past 2+ years. And I do think the vaccines have a major role in that. And I don't think that's just, I don't think it's just depopulation. I think there is a move toward creating a surveillance state. I've spoken before about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. His evil little minion, Yuval Noah Harari, is quite open in talking about the fact that those are the surveillance state. Those are words that he uses. And he talks about how we're, as we're moving into this new era, this new fourth industrial revolution, this great reset, ushering in this new fourth industrial revolution, about how to manage the population. And he's quite open and says, we'll use drugs and entertainment, games. In Roman times, there was a poet who referred to it as bread and circuses. Keep the people fed, keep them entertained, and you can keep the population placated. You can keep them calm. You can keep them from overthrowing the status quo. And Yuval Noah Harari talks about it in terms of drugs and gaming. Sounds to me like a millennial version of bread and circuses from Roman times. And the last thing I wanted to kind of end off with was we were talking about the generations and how there are we have different names for the different generations. And I brought it up because this is just off Google. So when we're looking at generations, the oldest living people are said to be of the greatest generation, and those are people who were born between 1901 and 1924. So we're talking people who are 98 plus. and the greatest generation. And those are the people who fought the Second World War. And then the generation that followed is referred to as the silent generation, born from 1925 to 1945. Those, by and large, who were too young to fight in the Second World War. My parents would have been part of that silent generation. That was followed by the post-war baby boom generation, which on this particular site I'm looking at right now puts it down as 1946 to 1964. And then Gen X, which I fall into, which is from 65 until 1979. Then they drop the letters. They go to millennials. And on this site again, it's millennials are 1980 to 1994. And after millennials is Gen Z. I have my two oldest children fall into this. Gen Z, born 1995 to 2012. The interesting thing is, what do they call those who are born from 2013 to 2000, and they're projecting that this generation will end sometime around 2025? And my youngest is born in 2013, and they're calling this Gen Alpha. They've gone back to the start. It's almost like they're resetting things back to the start. We're going back to the beginning. We're going back to Alpha now. We're starting new. We're going to reset everything. And don't have much more to say than that. I would invite you to look up Ezekiel Emanuel, who, as I said, is an advisor to Joe Biden, and I think he's the head of bioethics at the National Institutes of Health in the United States, and that's Anthony Fauci's organization. And his view that life if you're 75 or older, then, well, your life isn't worth living. That's according to one of Joe Biden's top advisors. And now, we have these vaccines. I'll end it off talking about that, talking about the fact that they're really pushing these bivalent booster shots, and that what I'll call the anti-vax camp, those who are opposed, at least specifically to the COVID shots, our numbers are swelling. It was just reported that Theresa Tam, who's Canada's Chief Medical Officer of Health, these are the numbers that she put forward in an article I read, and that's 80% of all Canadians, from 0 to whatever, the entire population, 80% of us have had 2 doses. So there are 20% who are unvaxxed, millions of us, completely with the COVID shots. However, the number of people who have had a third or more, the number of people who have been boosted, it's actually less than 50%. So a lot of people have said, 2 shots, I'm tapping out, I'm done. And those of us who said no from the start need to be loud, and we need to be proud and forthcoming, because there has been an effort, there has been a branding, there has been slander by Jagmeet Singh, leader of Canada's official opposition, by Justin Trudeau, by countless other public officials, attempting to smear, slander anyone who dared question the wisdom of rolling up your sleeve for a shot that was rushed into development at warp speed and did not undergo the proper and required safety protocols and regulatory oversight. We're rushing it through. 8-9 months. That's all we need. Well, vaccines take 10 years. Not now. We don't need to. It's an emergency. We don't have time to do things properly. Donnie is saying, I'm never taking another booster. I told the story of how my Phil, almost died from taking his first booster. I'll tell you something about the mRNA. And that's not the only platform. There's mRNA, there are vector father-in-law, Phil. There's mRNA, there's vector, and there are other platforms. The one thing is, and I want you to remember this, the mRNA, and everyone should remember this, when they first rolled out, they talked about the fact that the storage temperatures that they needed to store these vaccines at. And I forget specifically the temperatures, but I think it was like -40 or even -70 Fahrenheit. Incredibly cold temperatures it had to be stored at. And that is because mRNA is said to be incredibly unstable, hence why it needs to be frozen at temperatures. And this was supposed to be a big problem because most commercial storage units, cold storage units, they're not designed to keep things at temperature. Most cold storage units want to keep things at 30 degrees Fahrenheit or somewhere just below 0 degrees Celsius, not like -40 or -30. That's crazy. And the reason they needed to do this, it was said, was because mRNA is incredibly unstable. So I have to question, I wonder whether if the vaccine, human error is common in every endeavor. Is it possible that the mRNA, the instructions that tell your body how to build this toxic spike protein, did they break down? Did they break down and not did people not get, were the instructions not delivered into their deltoid? I had speculated that if I was ever in a situation where, for whatever reason, I had no choice, or I was having it forced on me or something of that description, I was thinking I would ask to see the bottle, and then I'd hold it before they stuck the syringe in and warm it up with my body heat, and likewise ask if I could hold the syringe and warm it up and maybe cause that mRNA, this nanolipid particle, to break into little bits. And Donnie's saying, I don't know what happened. He got his first dose about a year ago. Right now, I'm at 5 in terms of negative adverse reactions, of which I am aware. I have there was a 47-year-old former colleague of mine. I got called one Sunday at church by a former sergeant of mine. He wanted to let me know that a former colleague, a mutual colleague, had passed away in his apartment, 47 years of age. And then another one was a member of my extended family, 38 years of age, so about 6 foot tall, maybe a little taller, only 180 pounds, a guy who keeps super fit and healthy, has a gym in his basement with an elliptical and a treadmill. That's for the winter months when he can't go out jogging and walking when things get too cold. He had a heart attack. And the thing is, within the family, I'm speaking a bit out of turn because he wants it kind of kept quiet. He doesn't want, I don't know whether it's a case of he doesn't want the sympathy, or he doesn't want people thinking he has a health issue, or whatever. He doesn't want it shared. Then I have within my town a local counselor, south of 60s, and I believe he's somewhere between 50 and 60s, in his 50s, had a massive heart attack, hospitalized. There is a woman with whom I went to church previously. She had a massive aneurysm. The guy I know who's somewhere in around the 50 years of age, he had a massive stroke. I've known him for about 12 years, actually more, about 15 years. Johnny, he had a massive stroke. So there are 5 that I'm aware of, and people don't always talk about it. Like, how many more are there? Donnie's saying he got weak instantly, couldn't get up to go to the bathroom at night. Day 2, couldn't breathe right. My wife took him to the hospital, and they thought he had COVID. He didn't. They gave him oxygen on the 3rd day. This is one of the things that unfortunately I am finding, that broader Canadian society, probably Western society, we're turning into something of a death cult, because all we ever want to do is talk about death now. Before, it was death from COVID, the COVID Karen and Carls. Everyone was dying of COVID. It's like people in Canada never died before COVID came along. Newsflash. Before COVID came along, Canada was expected to have about 800 deaths each and every day, and that's going to keep going up because of this baby boomer population getting older. Canada's the rate of death is expressed per 1,000, and in 2020 we were supposed to have 7.803 deaths per 1,000 people in the population, and then in 2021 that was supposed to go up to 7.849, and that was keep climbing for the next 30 years, right up until in and around 2050, when that is going to go over 10 per 1,000 of population. So death is normal. Death happens. It's tragic, it's sad, but dying is part of living. The minute we start, there's a line from a song. When they begin the overture, they start to end the show. As soon as we take our first breath on this, in this world, we're on that line towards our last breath. Everyone's going to die, and for the first year or so of COVID, everyone dying, it was always COVID death, COVID death, COVID death. All of a sudden, no one died of anything else, and now those of us who have known from the beginning that this isn't right, like something is wrong here, and now we're looking at these vaccines. Now we're attributing every death and suggesting that it, and I don't know. I don't think that's fair. This guy, Robbie Coltrane, the actor who was in the BBC show Cracker, and more famously played Hagrid in the Harry Potter films. He just passed away, and I believe he was 72 years of age. And judging by, I don't know the man, I haven't followed his career closely. I knew him as Hagrid, but he's a big guy. I don't know if he all of a sudden trimmed down or something, but he looked to be a large, overweight gentleman, and he passed away. Now, was he jabbed? 99% sure he was, but before COVID and before the jabs, if someone of his description, of his age and his, BMI, body mass index, if someone like that had passed away, no one would bat an eyelash. And so it's difficult to be discerning about, but when you see a young kid like Justin Bieber with facial paralysis, Bell's palsy, and that's a known risk factor with the COVID jabs. I think that's, when I look at my brother, this member of my extended family, 38 years of age, 6 foot, 180 pounds, heart attack, give me a break. And same with Kev, the guy I used to work with, 47, heart attack, really? And there's just too many. If it was one, okay, maybe. But there's another individual I know in my extended family on my side, but this individual's 87, 88 years of age and had a stroke after her booster. Now, cause and effect, impossible to say. But anyway, Donnie, thank you very much for engaging. I appreciate it. I enjoy the dialogue, and I know typing is not the best way, but it's appreciated. But interesting times. I think that's a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times, because interesting is what we've been living for the past 2+ years, 2.5 years or more. And I think things are going to get more interesting. Our hospital system is going to get crushed. It was getting crushed before COVID came along. And now, the last pre-COVID winter was, 2019, 2020. The boomer population is now 2-3 years older than that now. And so things are going to be even worse. And now, I didn't talk about the fact that, it's not, as all these baby boomers exit, I mean, the back end, is in around the age of 60, they're retiring now. And they're leaving the manufacturing sector, they're leaving the trades, and they're leaving the healthcare sector too. And we can't just backfill everything with immigration, because the countries that we are getting people from, Canada, we have a lot of immigrants who come from countries like India, Sri Lanka, these countries, developing countries, they need skilled professionals as well. You can just rob from them. And people who have the skills and are highly educated don't always necessarily want to leave. We're bringing the numbers in, but are we bringing people who can do the job? And really, should we? There's an ethical issue there as well. But this is the kind of discussion, or kind of talking about topics like this, can spider web out in a million different directions, and you never get to the end of it, because each talking point leads you to 5 more, and those 5 lead to 10 more, and you go on and on and on, and it never ends. So, and I've gabbed on long enough. God bless, and probably see you again later in the week. And again, thanks again, Donnie, for chiming in.